This channel recently surpassed 1 million views, and I also crossed the 30,000 follower milestone on Instagram. So to celebrate, this week's video is dedicated to my viewers and responding to their frequently asked questions. Undoubtedly, the question I'm asked most frequently is how I first got into wine. It's definitely not something that I was brought up with, as my parents not only didn't drink wine, but they really didn't drink alcohol at all. As a young attorney starting out, I would typically go for beer or cocktails, maybe an occasional glass of wine here or there, but it was definitely my least favorite beverage at the time. But then I had an opportunity to work with one of my colleagues, who's definitely the most prominent attorney at my firm, and who had a very discerning palate. He does a lot of work for clients such as Oprah Winfrey and Dr. Phil, and so he had a much bigger expense account than I did. He had just returned from a visit to Napa and was super excited about the wines, and we were at a steakhouse, so he ended up ordering a bottle of Opus One from the 2005 vintage to share with us at dinner. This was by far the most expensive and the most enjoyable wine I had ever had to date. With one sip of that wine, I was simply blown away. It was so much better than anything else I had ever had. It was hard to believe it was wine. And especially when paired with the steak, it was just a magical match, and I was absolutely hooked. And so within 6 months of that fateful dinner, I was the one who was in Napa, visiting wineries and soaking it all in, and that's how it all began. If you had an aha moment, please let me know the wine that triggered it in the comments below. The next question is, which wine regions are you visiting in 2023? Well, so far this year I've been to Napa Valley, Champagne, Burgundy, Horseheaven Hills, Walla Walla, Texas Hill Country, and I still have a couple trips coming up. I will soon be in Barolo for truffle season, and then I'll be in Chianti Classico. At the end of the year, I'll be in Provence, so I may or may not do a little bit of wine tasting there as well. There's one more question that I had on wine travel, and this viewer asks, what is the best wine region to visit in terms of reasonable costs, quality wines, and the overall experience? This viewer was located in the United States, so I'm going to recommend a region in the United States. And specifically, I think that the Willamette Valley in Oregon is very hard to beat. There's excellent Pinot Noir and Chardonnay being produced there. The vintages have been getting more consistent, but even in bad vintages, the producers are getting better at handling those vintages and ensuring that the wines turn out well, notwithstanding the challenges. It's also easy to access, as it's only about an hour away from Portland, and you're also about an hour away from the Oregon coast. And so if you want to do more than just visit wineries, you can enjoy both Portland as well as the Oregon coast. I also like the fact that there's no sales tax in Oregon, so if you purchase wine, you won't have to pay a sales tax on that wine. And if you'd like an extended wine experience, you can probably drive to Walla Walla, which is only about 3 or 4 hours from Portland as well. Of course, on this channel, one of the primary focuses is identifying the very best wines possible at the very best price possible. And so the next question is, what are the top 3 wine regions in the world in terms of high quality to price ratio wines? There's probably some that I'll be forgetting, but 3 of my favorites include Baden, which has some outstanding Pinot Noir at very reasonable prices, and then I would say Gigondas and also Côte de Rhône Village, and Côte de Rhône Village plus named village. Both of those have just incredible wines at very, very reasonable price points. Even Châteauneuf is somewhat reasonable, but both Gigondas and the 2 higher tiers in the Côte de Rhône quality pyramid offer just exceptional quality at their price point. Another region that I think offers exceptional quality for the price is Sicily. This includes, but is not limited to, Etna. While I haven't done any videos on either Sicilian or Etna wines yet, it's definitely something that I'm working on, and I've been tasting more of those wines on my own lately. Lastly, I think Spain continues to offer good value, especially if you don't look to Priorat and Ribera del Duero, but you stick to some of the other well-known regions in Spain. The next question is how I tell the quality of a wine other than price and taste. And I'll start out by saying that price is not always a reliable indicator of quality. For example, Caymus Cabernet from Napa now sells for around $100 a bottle, but I think that there's many wines from Napa that sell for half the price yet offer better quality. So there's oftentimes a correlation between some basic quality level and the price, but it's certainly not proportional. Sometimes the label will give you some indication about the quality of a wine. This is especially true in Europe. In Italy, for example, Chianti Classico Reserva is subject to more strict production requirements than Chianti Classico, and so oftentimes Chianti Classico Reserva will have a higher quality level than Chianti Classico. That's not always the case, however, but it would give you something to go on if you're going to take a flyer on a wine. In general, the Chianti Classico Reserva has a better chance of being a quality wine than the Chianti Classico. But for me personally, the primary way that I evaluate wines is by tasting. And it's not just tasting the wine and saying thumbs up or thumbs down, this is either good or bad. There's a lot more that goes into it than that. In many instances, I'm even tasting these wines blind, and so I won't know what's on the label, nor will I know the price point when I'm evaluating a particular wine. But there's really 4 considerations that I take into account when I'm trying to assess the quality of a particular wine. First is the flavor and aromatic intensity. A thin wine will rarely be a high-quality wine. While flavor and aromatic intensity is necessary to have a quality wine, it's by no means sufficient. I'm also looking for balance. You could have, for example, a situation where a wine had intense flavors, but was flabby because it didn't have enough acidity. So what I'm looking for is a wine that has balance between the flavor intensity, the acidity levels, and also the structure or the tannins that are associated with that wine. Everything should be in balance. The next factor that I'll consider when determining the quality of a particular wine is if there's evidence of complexity. There's a whole host of considerations that can go into this factor, and I don't want to get too bogged down, but one thing that everyone can consider is whether or not the wine that you're experiencing is a simple wine or whether it's more complex. And one way to do that is by the descriptor profile. If, for example, you're getting nothing but fruit, and the fruit is just generally red fruit or black fruit, and you're not really able to determine particular types of fruit, rather it's just kind of like muddled red fruit, then it's probably a simple or a basic wine. In contrast, if you're getting lots of discrete red fruit, such as cherries, raspberries, strawberry, rhubarb, and others, and especially if you're also getting things like floral notes, whetstone, or other types of categories of descriptors, then you can probably bet that that's going to be a more complex wine. One of the very most important considerations that I take into account when evaluating the quality of the wine is the length of the finish. So when I'm tasting a wine, I'm always considering how long the finish will last. When I'm doing that, I'm considering only the positive characteristics of the wine and not the negative characteristics. And so if you get kind of like a nasty Robitussin bitter aftertaste on the wine, you don't want to count that, as that certainly does not mean that the wine is good quality, even though it has a long-lasting finish. If the finish will last for around 15 seconds, then I know it's probably an acceptable wine of good quality. If it's less than that, then it's probably a more basic or entry-level wine. And to the extent it lasts longer than that, perhaps as long as 45 seconds to a minute, then it's potentially a world-class wine. And of course, as mentioned, you only want to consider the positive characteristics. If you're interested in wine recommendations, wine collecting strategies, and learning more about wine, please do subscribe to my channel. I've been collecting wine for more than 15 years and also have a level 4 diploma from the WSET. So I have both formal certification as well as substantial practical knowledge from the School of Hard Knocks. The next question is whether it's always better to age wines. The answer is absolutely not. While I certainly primarily discuss wines that are designed to be age-worthy on this channel, the vast majority of wines that are produced are designed for either immediate consumption or certainly consumption within a few years after their release. At a high level, there's numerous factors that go into the production of a wine, both in the vineyard and in the winery. And a producer will take very different action both in the vineyard and in the winery when they're producing a wine that's going to be approachable and ready to enjoy on release than they will if they're going to be making an age-worthy complex wine that's designed to stand the test of time and be enjoyed 10 years or more down the road. Wines that are designed to be enjoyed in their youth will be produced in a fruity, more approachable style and one that has less structure and tannin so that you can enjoy it immediately. In contrast, a wine that you're going to want to put away for a number of years will be definitely much more structured and tannic, and the fruit may not be as generous as with the less expensive wine. An example could be with a Nebbiolo-based wine. If you're talking about a Barolo, that's probably going to be very structured and tannic in its youth, and something that will definitely benefit and gain some additional complexity with more time in the bottle. But you can still get the Alba Nebbiolo, for example, and that's going to be much more enjoyable in its youth, and it's going to be certainly much more approachable. And in fact, when you go to Piedmont, the vast majority of people who are eating in various restaurants will be ordering something like the Alba Nebbiolo rather than a new release Barolo. If it makes people happy to drink these wines when they're young, they should go ahead and do that. But I think in many instances that if people take into account the intent of the producer when they're making a selection, they may be able to get better bang for their buck and also a more enjoyable drinking experience. The next question is, what are some of the biggest mistakes that I made when I was starting out as a wine collector? And of course, I've already mentioned the fact that when I first started out, I bought exclusively California wines, and so that my collection lacked a bit of diversity and that I wish I bought more broadly when I first started out. But setting that aside, there's still a couple other mistakes that I think I made and which I regret. For example, in some instances, I would purchase in quantities of 12. Now, I'm generally purchasing more in quantities of 3 or 4, or perhaps 6. There's always some exceptions, but in general, I've found that purchasing in quantities of 3 or 4 works far better. In some instances, there's case purchases that I'm still trying to work through, and once you get critical mass in your cellar, it's somewhat unusual for you to want to drink the same wine every couple months or so. And so, for example, it would be rare for me to drink the same wine more than 2 or 3 times in a given year. Another mistake that I think I made was by not focusing even more heavily on super high-end wines. Cellar defenders are always going to be available, and you can always get more of them, but the super high-end wines are very, very hard to get, and the prices go up far more dramatically. This is so because there's a limited supply of them, and especially once they enter a stage when they have 10 to 15 years of age or more on them, then the prices tend to skyrocket. So certainly at the time, I could have purchased 1990 Bordeaux for far less than it costs now. The next question is, what is my recommended drinking window for high-end Pinot Noir from California? Certainly there can be some nice, vibrant, enjoyable fruit when those wines are young, but in my experience, they're definitely wines that you want to enjoy within the first 10 years of release. They usually show their best, in my opinion, around years 6, 7, and 8. There's been a few situations where I found that some of those Pinot Noir that were more than 10 years of age started to have fruit that was fading, and it was no longer sufficient to balance the alcohol levels, and it was a bit of a disjointed mess at that time. So I definitely think they show their best, probably from years 6 to 10, and really from years 6 to 8 or so. But if you enjoy fruit, then you can try them when they're young as well. Another question I'm asked quite frequently is, what is the best wine I've ever had, or the most expensive wine, or my favorite wine of all time? And for all variations of that question, the answer is the same. It was easily the 1990 Domaine della Romanée-Conti Romanée-Conti. That was easily the best wine that I've ever had, and certainly the most expensive. Despite the fact that this wine was remarkably ethereal and elegant, just a little taste of this wine on your palate lingered for well over a minute and had just astonishing complexity and intensity. It's like nothing I've ever had before, or probably will ever have again. The next question is whether or not I have any wine pet peeves. And I really only have one, and that is simplistic generalized thinking. So for example, when people say something like they don't drink Riesling because they don't like sweet wine, that really annoys me to no end. Of course, there's numerous expressions of Riesling, and Riesling can be made in many different styles. There are certainly numerous world-class Rieslings that are bone dry and which have no sweetness whatsoever. Better yet, many of these Rieslings offer incredible value and sell for extremely attractive prices. So anyone who is engaged in generalized thinking and who does not drink Riesling because they think it's sweet is definitely missing out. If there's one thing I've learned over the course of my wine journey, it's that there's both soulful wines and uninspiring wines being made in every region throughout the world and from every different grape variety. So it's very, very important to be selective and not generalize.